Hello, I am Rabbi Tuvia Bolton, and we're going to learn the laws of Passover. In a little more than 2 weeks, all of the Jews will be sitting around tables with their families and eating matzah and leaning over at the proper time and drinking 4 cups of wine at the proper time and relating the amazing story of how the Jews got out of Egypt, the Haggadah of Pesach. And this the Jewish people have been doing for 3,332 years, since the time they actually did get out of Egypt. So this requires a tremendous preparation. You can't just go and sit down and just eat. First of all, you have to know a little bit what matzah is, and you have to also get rid from your house, clean your house from the antithesis of matzah, which is called chametz. The difference between matzah and chametz, matzah is called unleavened bread. Unleavened bread. It's bread that has not risen up. And chametz is bread that has not been protected, has not been watched over to assure that it did not raise up. Essentially, the difference between matzah and chametz is almost nothing. The ingredients are the same, water and flour. The only difference is if you leave the water and flour, mix it up and leave it for a while, let's say 7-8 minutes, then that's called chametz, and it's one of the worst sins in Judaism. And if you don't leave it, but you need it, and you make it into these kosher matzot, then we'll talk about the laws, what is matzah shmura, and how you have to have matzah shmura. If you don't have, it's called matzah shmura, it's not kosher. We'll talk about that later. But let's talk now about what brings us to eat this matzah and this moror. We eat also bitter herbs and drink the 4 cups of wine. What exactly happened on that first Passover 3,332 years ago? So let's have a little Jewish history, 3 minutes of Jewish history. According to Judaism, God created the world from absolutely nothing. He created the world, and he created time, he created space, and he's creating it right now also, because time itself is just a creation. It's not like we're living within time. Time is also being created by God. Time is the interaction between the spiritual and the physical. We'll talk about that also, God willing, in other videos. But God created the whole world, and he creates it right now. And he started creating it 5,780 years ago, 2,448 years before the Jews left Egypt. He put in the world man. Man was supposed to be in the world in order to perfect the world, to reveal why each thing is being created. For he gave names to all the animals. That's what Adam was supposed to do. But as we know, he didn't do it, and the world descended more and more into egotism and forgetting about the idea of the Creator and what the Creator wants and our responsibility to him, until came Abraham, about 2,000 years after Adam. And Abraham had a son called Isaac, and Isaac had a son called Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. And one of them was called Joseph, and 10 of them hated Joseph. And they eventually sold him down into Egypt, where he was put into prison, and miraculously got out of prison and became the king of the whole country. And that country, Egypt, then ruled over the whole world. So Joseph was the king virtually of the whole world. And there was a famine in the world, something like nowadays with the corona. The whole world was affected. Everyone had to go to Egypt in order to get food. That was the only place where there was food, due to the wisdom and the intuition, holy intuition of Joseph to store up the food, all the food in Egypt for 7 years. So everyone went down, and including Jacob and his starving sons. They were all starving, Jacob's and his sons. They all went down, and they were welcomed in Egypt. Joseph revealed himself that he had no grudge against them, and the Jews went down there, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied, and the Egyptians eventually made them slaves. And the Jews were slaves basically for 4 generations. 210 years the Jews were in Egypt, and they were slaves in Egypt. We won't go into how much of the time was actually real hard slavery, etc. But nevertheless, they were absolute slaves in Egypt. There was no possible way they could get out. They didn't want to get out. They didn't think it was possible to get out. They had such slave mentality that even after they got out, they wanted to go back. Comes along Moses, and Moshe, and Moshe says, Jews, we're getting out. We're leaving Egypt. And the Jews at first didn't believe, and then they did believe, and then things got worse. And finally, Moses, they brought plagues. 10 plagues on the Egyptians, and why there had to be 10, why there couldn't be one. That's what God wanted. There were Kabbalistic reasons behind this, psychological reasons. Nevertheless, he brought 10 plagues on the Egyptians. And finally, he gave the Jews commandments. And one of the commandments was take a sheep into your house 10 days before what's going to be the Passover night, right before the Passover night, to slaughter it, the sheep, and to eat it together with matzah that I talked to you about, and moror. And then everyone at midnight, the angel of death passed over all the houses to put the blood of the sheep on the inside of the doorpost. We don't do this anymore. It was only done that generation when they left Egypt. And God passed over all the houses of the Jews, killed all the firstborn of the Egyptians, and the Jews left Egypt, all of them, 3 million people at once. They all left Egypt. Never been such a thing like this in the history of the world. 7 days later, God split for them the sea. That's the 7th day of Passover. 50 days after they got out of Egypt, they came to Mount Sinai, and God revealed himself, like it says, panim lepanim, face to face. And they all heard God, and they all saw God, and their souls jumped out of their bodies, and God gave them the Torah. Then he gave them the first of the 10 commandments. Nevertheless, he gave them his Torah. That's also a long process. It took 120 days. But the purpose of them going out of Egypt was to receive the Torah. And the reason for them receiving the Torah was to take this whole entire business, their experience of going out of Egypt, and the Holy Torah, and going to the land of Israel, make the land of Israel a holy place, and from that even make the whole world a holy place. And this will fix up what Adam, first man, messed up 2,448 years before that. Well, they spent 40 years in the desert, so it was 2,488 years before that. And that is why we sit around the table and we eat matzah, is in order to not only to remind us of what happened on that night, but also to remind us what's happening now. The same God that took us out of Egypt then is the same God as now. And the same God that chose the Jewish people back then is the same God now. And the Jewish people are still chosen. And they're chosen for the same purpose, to go into the land of Israel and to make the world a holy place. But just as back then it was done by one person, Moses, who went against the spirit of everybody and made everybody change at least their plans and leave Egypt. Well, in the future, we're waiting for the Mashiach. The Mashiach will be a Jew. It says that Moses was the first redeemer, Goel Rishon. The Mashiach will be the last redeemer. And he will he will take the Egypt out of the Jews. In other words, he'll take out of us our selfishness. The selfishness that brings a person to idolatry, that brings a person to licentiousness, that brings all the not good things. Mashiach, by the way, will show all the world that there's a creator and that only he should be worshipped, and that all the religions are lies. All the religions are lies. Like it says in Jeremiah, where is it? 16:19 or something. 16. All the non-Jews will come to Israel and they'll say, Sheker nachalu avotenu, our fathers gave us lies. They inherited us lies. So there won't be any more religions in the world. Then everybody's going to go out of their Egypt, and that's what we have to do every day also, to know that God is helping us to go out of our personal fears, limitations, lusts, desires, anger, jealousy, etc. Go out of it. The world can do without those things. And that's why the matzah gives us power. Matzah is called the food of faith. Matzah is called the food of healing. Meichla de meimanuta, meichla de esvuta, it says. That's what it calls in the Zohar. So to understand this a little bit more deeply, first of all, we'll have to understand what it means, the idea of chometz, how to get rid of it, and what it is, and what the steps we have to take, God willing, in the next class.